Next time we're going to be live streamed on YouTube as well. So that's very exciting. Thanks, Lily, for your help with that.
Absolutely.
Then the last thing is if everyone will sign into the chat room so we can keep up with who's here today. And I think that's all the housekeeping things that I have. So today we're going to be talking with Jenna Crawley, who is a therapist not only at the Hospitality House, but the Community Care Clinic as well. Am I calling it the right thing, Jenna?
Yep, that's right.
And so I'm going to ask her to introduce herself and talk to you about her role at the shelter, and then all kinds of things about the connection between trauma and homelessness, and the things they do to help increase resiliency with the people that they work with, and then also promote wellness in themselves. I'm excited, Jenna, that we get to talk today. Thanks for making time for us, and Lily as well.
Oh, thank you. It's so nice to see all of your wonderful faces or names, because since COVID happened and the times changed for the meetings, I haven't been able to attend them. And so I told Denise yesterday, I was like, I guess this is how I get to a meeting, is to get to be the speaker. But everything got rearranged really quickly as a result of that. So anyway, I've missed you guys a ton, and it's awesome. It's so awesome to be back, because I think this is such a huge part of resiliency when we talk about it. It's just a huge part of the community resiliency is this group. Not that you guys need me to tell you that, you already know that. So what do you want me to start with? Just who I am and what I do?
Yes, if that's a great place to start, who you are and what you do and how long you've been doing it and how you came to be doing it. Because I know I think we met for the first time at school when you were one of the school-based therapists, and then went to Hospitality House. So you have some experiences that people may not know about. So if you don't mind to just share a little bit about yourself with us.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, Denise is absolutely right. I think that from the time I was like 12 years old, I was working with children, babysitting. I don't even know if 12-year-olds are allowed to babysit anymore, but I had like 10 of them under my care at that age. And it's just, so children was like that for the longest time. Working with kids was my focus, and everything career-wise that I did really revolved around that. My husband and I were both at a therapeutic wilderness school for 5 years right before we moved to Boone. And so we were living outside, and I mean, that was a pretty amazing and valuable time just in terms of everything in my career. But then moved to Boone and ended up going back to school and got involved with public mental health and did school-based therapy and intensive in-home therapy. And then a job opened up at the Hospitality House in the Community Care Clinic that was part-time. It was 20 hours a week at each location. And so, see, I'm one of these people that I like new adventures and I like new challenges and I like to grow. It's really important for me to grow professionally and personally. I love learning. And so I, took kind of stood out on a limb and applied for the job and got it, and went and started at the Hospitality House and Community Care Clinic and have not looked back since. I love it there. I just love it. And there are times that, it's challenge. Lily can talk about this as well. It's challenging work. It's hard work. It's rewarding work. There are times that I want to pull my hair out and, crawl under a rug. And there are times that I just want to jump as high as I can and touch the sky. And but the amazing work that's done in that shelter and in that program and in the therapy room and with the healing that goes on at that level, I can't look back, So I feel incredible. I feel like I'm in the right place, which is such a nice thing to have in life. I feel like I am right where I need to be. So much so that my husband ended up, and we had talked about this was a plan, but he ended up leaving his job a year ago to do some, traveling and fulfill some dreams. He wanted to do it before his retirement age so that he still could do it and that kind of stuff. And he wanted me to come. We were gonna uproot everything. We were gonna go do this as a family. And I was like, I really actually love what I'm doing right now, and I don't want to leave it. And so that's the level of just where I am.
I really
So,
appreciate you, Jenna, being honest about that it can be challenging, because one of the things we're going to talk about at the end is how you promote wellness in yourself. Oh
yeah,
gosh, I'm sorry, there's an announcement. Um, because I think sometimes we're all so busy putting on the mask of I'm okay and everything's fine that we
yes,
don't get the support we need for ourselves. So I really like that you're honest about it. It can be a real challenge and it can be
yes,
draining, and sometimes it's really rewarding. So thank you for that.
yeah, no, absolutely. So, so that's the really short story. And then, the grant ended that was um, paying for the position, the part-time position. And so both of the agencies ended up being able to continue the programs just by other funding sources and sustain them. So I am still at the community care clinic. I dropped my hours down to 11 hours a week there, just for more personal reasons, because I didn't want to miss out on my child's life growing up. So I did drop a few hours there. I say that, and then I ended up picking them up and filling them up with all sorts of other things. But and then I'm still at the hospitality house. Actually, since COVID started, have been there more, kind of, you know, 20 hours and then more as things come up and as things are needed. So that's where, and I think both agencies are looking at really taking the mental health program and trying to, we're always trying to grow it and get the funding for it and get the support and the resources for it, because the need is so much greater than my capability at 20 hours a week. So.
Do you have a, I know this is like so practical and tedious details, but do you have a set schedule that you're at each place, or do you
Yeah.
just respond to the need?
Nope, I have a set schedule that I'm at each place, and then with COVID, because I'm doing therapy from home just for it just made sense from a safety perspective, obviously. And so what ends up happening is I've had to be the boundaries for anyone who's worked at home they've been really blurred. So a lot of times when we're working from home, I've noticed I'm like, whoa, you don't just leave work at work, it's really there with you. So which I think is very helpful in some capacities and then harder in other capacities. But I do kind of add hours as needed and manage crises if I can help out with them that are coming up, even if it's not during my regular work hours. So, but yeah,
Awesome.
there's a set schedule for each agency.
Okay, thank you for that. And so Lily, you want to add anything before we?
Yeah, I'll introduce myself a little bit.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I graduated last December with my degree in social work, and I was actually offered a job at the YMCA being a children's coordinator, and it just didn't feel like it fit. So I settled for, I found a shelter associate position at the hospitality house, and I only had a couple hours a week here and there. I was mainly a ski instructor, which is still my passion, but a couple months into being a shelter associate, the data specialist left to go back to school. And so there was this amazing opportunity. As Kelly knows, I love macro social work. I'm all about data. And so I was just thrilled at the opportunity. Now I work with, it's called HMIS, Homeless Management Information System. It's this huge piece of database software that is endless like most software. And so I've been exploring that constantly. I started in June as the data specialist. Already I've gotten just so much information. I really have a unique perspective on this issue because I get to look at the big numbers. I get to see the numbers for all 7 counties, and I'm also the intake specialist. So I see situations. I'm fostering 5 kittens, so they will probably pop up here and there. But I get a unique perspective because not only do I see the data, but I see the intakes. I see the situations that people come to us from, and everyone honestly has a traumatic story. We were talking about percentages, and it really seems like everyone that I encounter with during an intake has faced some kind of traumatic experience that really makes life for them difficult, and they have a lot of obstacles that they have to face. But Jenna's right, from smiling and jumping up and down to screaming and pulling hair out, everything in between. Some days are all of it,
Mhm.
but it's a blessing to work there, and Jenna's a joy to work with.
Oh, thank you. I feel the same way about you. So,
Thanks.
I really do. Yeah.
That
Would
was
it be
just a reminder to sign into the chat. Sorry. To
Oh,
just
no,
go
you're
back and-
fine. I was going to say, would it be helpful? Because we did, when Lily and I found out we were doing this yesterday, we did end up gathering some of the See, this is what happens at the hospitality house is we roll with the punches, you know? So originally it was going to be Todd and Sonia and Tina, and they were going to be on this chat, and but things are happening. So the flexibility is the name of the game. So, but we did pull out the statistics, Denise, and I think these are really sobering, just because it helps give a framework for the rest of the conversation too.
Yeah.
So with the national statistics wise, 80% of mothers with children experiencing homelessness have experienced domestic violence. So that's a really high statistic just on the domestic violence piece. We're not even talking about childhood trauma at that point. Between 22 and 50%, and I know there's a wide gap there, but that's what it is, report that domestic violence was the cause of homelessness. And Lily, I think that's pretty accurate with which sorry, I keep looking I know I'm looking to the side, but it's because you're on my side. So I just want people to know that I'm really trying to be very intentional with looking at that camera, but Lily's over there and so is Denise. So, so if I'm looking sideways, that's why. But I think that was our statistics also kind of echoed that same, right? It was
They did.
Yeah.
And with 10% of our residents last year were actively fleeing. So we're talking 3 months before they experienced homelessness, there was some active violence against them in a domestic situation. Yeah.
And so that's just the domestic piece. In terms of the statistics, I do some work with, just managing my own statistics of the people that I see. The numbers are significantly higher. So of the folks that I'm working with, I've got over 90% that have experienced trauma, and likely even more than that, that it just may be, we haven't gotten to that point yet. And then over 80% were experienced it in childhood, and more often than not, like significantly more often than not, there is both and all of it. And we're talking about, I don't love the terms big T traumas and little T traumas, because I think it's trauma is trauma, but this is like, these are both, so it is life-threatening situations as well as an acts of violence, as well as being talked down upon, bullied, that kind of stuff. So we're looking at in a lot of cases, multiple experiences, and many stemming from childhood. So
that was something that we had talked about, Jenna. One of the reasons I was so looking forward to you talking today, and you and I talked about this yesterday, was I had been in a meeting with y'all a couple of years ago, and you said, because we do intake with people, we know that, and you said, I don't know if these statistics are current, but at the time when we were talking, more than 60% of the people coming in the door were coming in the door because of a trauma without looking at anything to do with what happened to them before that moment. Yeah. And so when you think about just the trauma that brought them there without even looking at their history, that has always stayed in my mind since that conversation.
Yeah, and we tried to find that statistic to like make sure that we were, to see if it was still accurate, and we were like, we don't know where that came from at that time. So, but that got Lily looking at the intakes and things like that too, because it is, and it is like to sit and listen to some of the stories, is really, sometimes it's incredibly hard and it's incredibly challenging. And then I also, in all of that, am always blown away by, how well people are doing in spite of what has happened to them. So yes, there's a lot that brings people to the door. And homelessness and trauma, it is this interactive weave, so if you look at it from, and we can get into, and this group is probably, very, very familiar with like the impact of childhood trauma on the brain, on what happens to the brain, on how we respond to situations, on the hand, all of that stuff, right? And that the repeated trauma and the repeated trauma and the repeated trauma, or traumatic situations or terrifying situations does change the brain and does make the amygdala, bigger, and does cause our responses and our fight, flight, and freeze to be there all the time, and the cortisol levels high and all of that. So we know that. And so we know that, like, that in childhood, if we're looking at children that are just struggling for good reason with emotional regulation skills for good reason because of the traumas that they're going through, it is harder to survive in this world, right? It's harder to get ahead. It's harder to do the things that teachers want you to do, or parents want you to do, or all of these organizations want you to do. So there's that level of the biology of trauma on the brain, and then there's the level of homelessness in and of itself is traumatic. It is traumatic to not know where you are going to sleep tonight, or how you are going to bathe, or what your transportation is going to look like, or do you have clean clothes to wear? All of that stuff, it is like there is that whole level of uncertainty. And looking up the statistics, and we're going to talk about like debunking some myths later with homelessness. One of the things that of course this makes sense, but I was reading last night, like folks that are experiencing homelessness are actually more likely to have crimes inflicted on them than others, right? Which makes sense. And so, but then you're looking at like, okay, and then let's add to all of those things the fact that we may not be in physically safe places. And I'm not necessarily talking about the shelter, I'm talking about the homelessness in general.
We do a vulnerability screening that I've done with a lot of our residents, and I have been truly surprised at the amount of people that say they have experienced random violence, acts of violence against them randomly, because since they've been homeless, that's one of the things that qualifies them as more vulnerable, is that, just being in those situations with people that struggle with the mental issues that face the homeless, they're not ever really safe. When they don't have a place they can hide, they're always at a risk of being attacked.
Yeah. And I thank you. I think that's a really, really good point to bring up. And then we have the trauma. The other parts of the trauma of homelessness is how you're then perceived in society, right? And then this is heartbreaking, because not only are you already just like, not only who knows what you've already been through in your life, but then it is being treated differently in different capacities at different agencies when you're asking for help, or being, ostracized because you are not fitting this, mold, all of that stuff. We know the science and the research about connection. We know how important it is, and we know how traumatic and terrible it is when we feel ostracized, or when we feel rejected, or when we feel shunned from our society and our cultural group, and so then not good, it's just not, we're not meant to be in that. We're not meant to live alone. We're meant to live and be with people. So then biologically, all this stuff happens in the brain, and the body the pain is in the brain. The pain registers as physical pain, this kind of emotional pain, and ostracized, and these shunning experiences. So many layers of it. Many layers.
Jenna, one question that I'll have just listening to you talk, you may going to get to that later, so if you want to wait till another time, but it occurs to me, and we were talking to Ashley McKinney last week about trauma-focused CBT, and how therapy is a pretty intense process, not just for the client, but the therapist, but that this sounds to me almost more like a crisis intervention kind of therapy. And so I'm assuming that there are sometimes some clients that you work with long-term who maybe do a more traditional type of therapy, but that I'm guessing often it's a crisis intervention kind of therapy, trying to get people stabilized. Is that true?
It's both. One of the other reasons I love my job and love being at the shelter is that once once folks come into the shelter and start working with me, I get to continue that relationship regardless of whether or not they're staying there. So the level, which is awesome. Okay, so it doesn't have to be just while you're here. It can be long term. The other thing that I love is that the therapy is free and it's voluntary. So I'm not billing insurance, which I love. Okay, I'm not having to, it's a beautiful thing. And I'm like, why would I ever leave this? But it's free, it's voluntary. And so people are at different capacities of wanting to heal and what they need, like you said. So a lot of the times it is very much like, okay, what do I need to do to manage these stressors in my life right now? What is the first step? What is my priority? How can I calm the brain down and the body down? How can I respond to situations differently? But very quickly we start, it's because it's really hard to address present day stressors without looking at where they're coming from, right? And looking at how our reactions and our experiences have impacted us. And so very quickly it does just bring stuff up. Even the shorter term things will. But so folks can come in and out. I have people that will, engage for a while, a few months, and then they may disappear for a little while, and then they'll be back, for a few months. And then I've got others that are consistently there every single week, like doing really deep work, doing the healing work, and are in that place where they're wanting it. And I'm certified in, I've taken some TFCBT courses and things like that, but I'm certified in EMDR, which is another trauma informed therapy approach. And so a lot of the work that I do, even the short-term stuff, I'm always working with this perspective of, okay, these are a lot of times our reactions are things, they're responses to old reactions that used to work and served us well at some point in our life, and so there's always that, like, where is this old stuff coming from? How is the past influencing what's going on today, and that kind of thing.
And one thing that I know just from knowing you that not everybody may not know is that you primarily only work with people over 18. So you're not working with the children. Is that right? Yeah,
more often than not, I'm working, and I can work with the children. It's just happened to be that more often than not, I end up engaging with the parents, and then especially, well, and one of the reasons is because, or if there's a need for someone different to work with the child, someone different to work with the parents, more often than not, the children may have Medicaid, they may have another way of seeing a therapist, whereas the adults may not have health insurance. And so it's a nice, easy fit, but yeah, I've worked with adolescents and young adults. And I have actually worked with children at the hospitality house as well, but it's much more an adult population right now.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So you said we're going to get into some myths and stereotypes.
Oh, Lily had this great idea. So you want to share it, Lily?
I was just curious. I was going to crowdsource some ideas on what have you heard people say about homeless people. What are some stereotypes? Obviously, most of us here are not going to believe those stereotypes. It's not a reflection of your personal beliefs, but just you'll put in the chat or just speak up about something you've heard about homeless people. I know there's a lot of rumors that circulate about how people get in those situations. If they want a job, they can get one.
Number one, I think that's number one. Yep.
Mentally ill or addicts. If they would just stop using, it's that simple. Why don't? Too lazy, their own fault. Yeah, people really like to victim blame in this population, as with many other populations. As long as we pay their way, they won't change. That one, they all hurt, but that one's an argument to stop helping people who need it, and that one really hurts. Jenna, you've got a long list of.
I know.
Defeat those stereotypes.
I appreciate that. What was the Lily? What was the one that I started to write these down, but there's no way I'm going to get them. So
I'll look back at the chat. We'll start with.
If we look at where should we start?
job. If they want a job, they can get one if they would just get a job.
Okay, yeah, the job thing, lots of layers. So I think these myths are going to roll up about this. Many people, homeless people, have jobs. So number one, a lot already have jobs. There are going to be lots of different levels of debunking these myths. It was interesting, and I was just doing some general research about it last night, and it was like I'd find the one that would debunk from one, they debunk a myth, but it was only really addressing one way to debunk it, because there's lots of ways to debunk these. So if they can only get jobs, one, there are so many people that have jobs and just don't make enough money, because they just don't, because the cost of living is higher than what they're making. So that's number one. And Lily, I don't even know if you have data on that or not. It probably doesn't really matter. We just know it anecdotally. We know it from our experiences. People work,
Yeah, and we do record amount of income, and we have a lot of people that have income when they come in.
Yep.
Almost none of them are over $400, because the work that these people qualify for is usually painting or cleaning, and it's usually gendered as men paint and women clean, and the work is never consistent. It's a boss that says, oh, I've got a job today, but not for 2 weeks. And so the income really varies when people come in.
Right. Then from a brain perspective, and I think this is really where we look at, when we look at trauma from a brain perspective, what trauma can also do is really mess with our reward centers in the brain. And so what that means is that we start to look like we're less motivated because our brain is responding to trauma. So it comes across as this like, and again, this is not everybody, and all of these myths, I don't want anyone to ever feel pigeonholed, like, oh, that's what's happening to me, or that's all of the people staying at the shelter or anything like that, because it's not, but these are just some of the things that we see and know. And that's really important. I don't want anyone to feel like anyone's getting pigeonholed into it's an all or nothing thing. But we do know that the impact of trauma on the brain and the impact of trauma on the reward center, and that it is incredibly taxing, and so you do just physically look drained and feel unmotivated and are dealing with all of these, responses to that. What else with the jobs? How else can we debunk that? There was one more thing I felt like
I have just a little story that is just, I feel like, pretty accurate to a lot of people's situation. Again, not to pigeonhole anybody, but there is this wonderful resident who came, just upstanding, had a clean history, except he had a bad event, and he became homeless because of a situation with the family. And he, in a panic, broke into the first house he could find and took a blanket. Just so happened that was a historical society, and the blanket was worth $30,000. And he has been slapped with multiple felonies for the rest of his life. Even that's his only charge. But because of those felonies, he's, housing and employment opportunities just disappeared.
Yeah, that was the third point. I knew there was one more. I was like, the barriers. So folks that are, this is also really important, folks that are wanting a job or have lost their job, or, and are searching and searching and searching. The job searching is challenging. And I have heard more than one story, dozens of stories of people coming in or interviewing at places and then being told, oh, you live at 338 Brook Hollow Road, and not getting the job as a result of their status of where they are staying. So it's not from, a lot of times, it is not from lack of effort. It is dealing with all of these, and the felonies, the backgrounds. People can be, there's things, that's a whole other topic, right? But they follow us, and they haunt us with housing, with jobs, with all of that stuff. So, yeah, I knew there was one more with that myth.
Another comment I thought was interesting, I just wanted to read, was myth that homeless people are inherently dangerous or to be feared.
Oh, yeah, I love that. Yep, because because I happened to look at that. I was like, well, what do the statistics say, right? And so, so last night, because that can sometimes help, especially for you guys that are really numbers people. I'm a feelings person, so I love you numbers people, because then I don't have to do it. But Statistically, homeless folks, we talked about it a little bit already, they're more likely to be the victims of crime as opposed to, they're not any more likely than anyone else to act on them. And there was, yeah, and so I think having that perspective helps to debunk that myth. You know, you're actually incredibly vulnerable when you don't have a house to live in. You know, the end. The end. So.
And it makes people defensive when they are constantly scared for their life. They're a little bit more wary of other people around them and just everything. And it's easier to frighten them. And, you know, people often respond louder than you would expect because they're in a place of that fight or flight response constantly.
Yes. Amazing point. Absolutely.
Another one that was in the chat, Jenna, is, which I think this is so interesting as just an unspoken myth, but that they don't have anything to offer me, which as soon as I read that, I was like, oh yeah, that is so indicative of our culture, that if we're not dressed a certain way with a certain amount of money in our pocket and a house and a job and a car that looks like this, then we have no value.
Isn't that incredibly sad too? It is incredibly sad because, again, as I was doing my little list of resilience strategies, which I loved having the time to like think about them and actually like focus on them for a minute. One of my strategies is actually reminding myself how incredibly honored and privileged I am to sit with folks and hear their stories. And I'm going to get emotional because this matters, you know, the things that people have gone through and the way that they have been able to get to where they are, even if it is at the shelter, is like, it's unbelievable, the condition of the human spirit. And then to be able to sit and share the story and heal and grow and heal and grow is to be able to sit and listen to that. There is so much that each of us has to offer, you know, each of us, regardless of our income. So I'm sorry, yeah, it's such a painfully sad myth. It's a painfully sad myth. And I feel sad for people that feel that way because they're missing out, you know. Sorry, because I just have to say, like, we work with the amazing problem solving, resourceful, creative, you know, brave, courageous folks, don't we, Lily? You know, I mean, it's like, we really do.
Yeah.
You know?
The music and the hard work, we don't have to pay anyone to do any of the yard work because the residents, if the lawnmower breaks, no problem, they can take it apart and put it back together. If the refrigerator's broken, no problem, there is a resident somewhere that knows how to put the refrigerator back together. Mm-hmm. I mean, they have skills, they have effort, it's just people aren't willing to give them the opportunity most of the time. And the music, I have that listed, we'll get to a little bit later, ways that the hospitality house tries to incorporate trauma-informed care. One of the things we do is we really try and embrace the creativity of our residents because they all can find such immense healing in their artistic expression. We usually try and keep a guitar in the lobby, and I've cried on my shift so many times when people sit down and play the music that they heard their dad play or that they heard in this. We have one guy who really liked to go to concerts, and he has all these wild, beautiful stories, and he's just like a philosopher king, and he's beautiful to listen to. And so all of them have immense value that's, you know, construed by how society views value in people with status and money. Not necessarily ideas, but I have learned so much from the residents there. And we always tell every volunteer, the most important thing you can do here is learn the story of a resident and just gain their point of view. And that's really where you gain the most learning.
One of the last myths on there I want to make sure you cover, Jenna, is addiction, because just like you and I were talking about yesterday, a lot of people coming through the door into the homeless shelter are coming there because of a trauma, but having a trauma from your childhood makes you more likely to experience homeless at some point. And addiction is that same, I think you said, however you said that was so cool, but interweaving of factors. And so addiction's another one that it's really hard to talk about which came first and which exacerbates the other. But if you could say something about addiction too.
Yeah, well, and I love that you bring that up. So I was like, talk about we could do a whole other series on addiction and trauma for sure, and the links. One of the things I love about the hospitality house, and it's hard, I'm not saying this is easy at all times, but we're a housing first model, which means that we're focusing on getting people into housing regardless of where they are in their recovery, which is awesome from my perspective. Not always easy, okay? And things come up and it is difficult and it's challenging and we're dealing with, with challenges a lot, but to be able to let someone know, regardless of where you are in your recovery, we value you as a human being enough to help you get into housing, and this is important. Is something I really, really respect, just the theory behind that. Okay, I completely lost my train of thought. Now, where was I going next? Okay, addiction and trauma. Yeah, very strong link and very strong interweave. It is, there is, and we know this just from the ACE statistics, just from that, the regular ACE study, we know that the risk of struggling with addiction later in life is very reflective of early childhood experiences or adverse early childhood experiences. And so I really, with regards to addiction, I work from the perspective where I meet people where they are in their recovery, and sure, like, it would be beautiful if everybody was in this place where they didn't ever want to use or drink again and were fully sober and fully recovered. But you know what, like, when we're looking at addiction, that's not realistic, and so, and it's not a sign of it's not a sign of people not being strong and it's not about people being weak, and it's not about people being bad or making bad choices. Addiction's a really powerful disease, and it is really, and it's a very powerful and a very painful disease. And so to be able to step back, and when folks are struggling with addiction, looking at, well, where did that come from? And boy, you'll hear where it came from. You'll hear the stories, you will totally be able to understand in a conversation with someone, okay, this makes a lot of sense now, and then doing some work around next steps and next phases and where they are in the stage of change and what's going to help them feel supported through their path, through their journey.
And you had mentioned, Jenna, that y'all operate on the housing first principle, but that y'all have not always done that, because I remember the first time I heard about that 3 years ago, maybe. And the first time I heard it, I'll be honest, I was like, what? Like, I had all those myths going in my head, like, they don't have to do any work before we give them a place to live. What is this?
Right.
And the more I have heard and read about that, and how, until you give somebody a home base where they feel safe and secure, they're really not stable to do the work.
Exactly.
So,
yes, exactly. It's like, yeah, it's the chicken and the egg thing, people need to be in a place of security and know, and not have to worry about where they're laying their head that night, or if they're going to be safe laying their head that night, or, and I mean, there's so much just in homelessness that can be really, 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 really traumatic. And people can be forced into doing things that they really don't want to do because of their homeless status, because it is like, this is what I have to do to have a roof over my head, and that's, and so, yes, to be able to say, we want to help you have the hierarchy of needs. We want to help you get those needs met. We want to help you get those basic needs met. And then we can look at those top needs, those, things that come after that, once you're not so stressed out about, like, are you going to be able to, do you have a place to lay your head at night? More than once, and I'm sure Lily's heard this too, but we have, more than one, on many occasions, folks have come into the shelter and after a period of time said, this is actually the first time in my life I've ever felt safe, physically safe.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
When
And
they
that's pretty
love that the
powerful.
doors, yeah. They
Yeah.
love that the doors lock is something I've
Yes.
heard a lot of people say. They say,
Yes. That
I
people
come in
can't
and the
get
door
to
is
me.
locked
Yep.
and I go to sleep, and they're excited about it. I'm
Yes.
like, yes, shelter is you're not going to file for a social security card if you don't have a bed. Okay. Your bed's always going to come first in that situation. And they can't focus on anything else until
How
that
could you make
housing
it
need is
to,
met.
meetings and groups if you don't know where you're going to sleep that night? I mean, it's all of that. I mean, it's all of that. And it's also, and then when there is a level of stability, then we can look at, okay, what's next? And full on recovery may or may not be part of that plan, but housing is there, or full on substance abuse or alcohol recovery. So, but the housing is there and the framework is laid,
And so I definitely agree with you. We could spend all of our Wednesday conversations on each one of these things individually, but you were also going to talk about things that y'all do. Lily mentioned music to help increase resilience in people that you work with.
So Jenna, I would say
Yeah.
is first line of defense there is the fact that we have a free mental health specialist. She can't see every resident. We've got 114 people with us right now. There's no way she could handle that load. She gets to as many people as often as she can, and each of them are so grateful, and they all rant and rave about how wonderful that is. But I've tried to help people with Medicare, with Medicaid, find any kind of mental health services. And really, for the population we work with, Jenna's it. I mean, we can fight and we can call people, but really, we don't have many options when it comes to mental health.
Lily, I'm so glad you bring that up, because I've actually and we're trying to get folks into like the hospital and into really needing intensive services. Essentially, there have been instances where our folks have been too vulnerable. I'm not making this up. Too vulnerable for the highest level of care, and those places will not take them, which means that they're staying with us, which means we are doing not enough because we're not capable of that.
Yeah, we are geriatrics, we are a psych ward, we are a homeless shelter. We have to encompass all of those things because of the resources lacking in the area.
But we are open, and so we end up, taking, and that is probably the biggest challenge, is when there is such this high need, and then knowing that person is not going to get it because they're too vulnerable. Because the agencies that are, as Lily said, the PRT officer, the residential care, I mean, they won't, they're too much of a whatever reason, So
I don't know if you can see the chat.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Lily. I was going to read it, but you can do it.
Can you speak to what too vulnerable may entail in those situations?
Yeah, so mental health, really, really high need for mental health care. In addition to physical, a lot of times what I have come into is the mental health needs are really high, but so are the physical needs. So hospitals will turn people away because they physically are not, they're not cleared to go physically to the different programs. Then these are the really, really significant ones. So again, I don't want to, this is just what happens,
Yeah, there's few people that are truly too vulnerable for services, but there's a couple cases that are sticking with my mind. One of our residents is extremely schizophrenic, and because she can't keep up with any kind of documentation, she never gets any kind of services. We've sent her to the hospital and they slap drug abuse on her and send her right back. We've tried to get psychiatric places to work with her, but since she can't keep up with her own information, she can't get help anywhere. And so that's what sticks out to me as too vulnerable to get help.
Yeah.
And another thing that makes me think of is, I think that when we're talking about myths and misconceptions, a common misconception is if you need to go to inpatient, then you go. But a lot of us know that you have to be a threat to yourself or others. So I have worked with, in the school system, parents who were seeing voices, seeing having hallucinations, hearing voices, thought that they were, any range of things going on with their thinking, but because they were, and then maybe they don't have insurance, or maybe their insurance doesn't cover the type of inpatient that you're looking at. And so it's actually very common in my experience that someone could need more intensive services and doesn't qualify for a number of reasons.
Yes.
And so they don't, and then your point that kind of reminds me of the schools, because we take them all. It doesn't matter whether they fit a certain criteria. If they're in our, if they live here, then they are our students. And same thing there is that y'all don't really have those exclusionary, you don't have to make a certain amount of money, you don't have to meet a certain criteria, you don't, if they are here and they are homeless, then they are with y'all. Yeah. And so if they need something more intensive and they don't qualify for it in some way, then they may not be going there, but they're still staying with you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I would like to take a second to point out that schools have transitioned online, and we have one computer for 7 families. So Watauga schools have honestly been doing a fantastic job. I have met many teachers that show up at the shelter with printed off work for the children that are staying there. And so that has been immensely helpful. So I know Denise is working with families at the hospitality house. So it is wonderful to see this care coordination and this attempt to stop this traumatic experience for these children, because that we are truly working our best to do such a thing. We do, we offer case management is another way we try to be informed. We try to keep up with everybody in the shelter and what's going on and make plans. Let's see, there was one, specifically what I do that I feel helps reduce the traumatic experience of entering a shelter. With the system I work with, we have the opportunity to create, to track everyone's stories when they first enter, so they're not constantly reliving the story every time they enter the shelter. So if a person comes, we record, we ask them the domestic violence questions the first time. Then we have a record of that, and we ask if anything needs to be updated. And if nothing needs to be updated, then we don't make them recount the story of their domestic violence that happened 5 years ago. So when I do tell them, all of this information goes into the computer, and we do have a release of information we sign with them, and I explain it. But that's something I try to do. Is it can be traumatic to retell and relive those stories every time you go seek services. So we really seek to reduce the number of times someone has to tell their story.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned a guitar in the lobby. I know that y'all have so many things going on. Is there speaking of like more artistic kinds of outlets, is there anything there that, as far as art lessons, or I know there's a garden in the back, for example.
Mm-hmm.
What are some kind of non-traditional, maybe non-formal, I guess is a better way, things that y'all put in place there to help with resilience?
So unfortunately, we have lost a large section of volunteers with COVID, and that has resulted in a lot of our residents not having as many fun activities. Before, we had a regular music group with someone from App would come and bring a large variety of instruments for people to try. We did have a volunteer that was really intimate, and for many months, she did an art program where she would we have people can use our address for mail, and so we have stacks on stacks of magazines, and so often we'll all get together and do magazine collages. We always keep crayons, and Sonia Hamby, she's the social worker there, and she always has party supplies and coloring supplies, and she is making sure that these kids are getting, she's the one who gets them the birthday presents and sets apart the time for the whole shelter to sing happy birthday to them, to make sure that they get that moment. So it gets personal in that way, that we really try and create an atmosphere of inclusivity and creativity.
Yeah, they were, and again, pre-COVID, we were doing I was doing the moving forward workshops, and that's in partnership with Oasis. So, but those are free workshops, and some of those had it was everything from confidence building to the job market, to talking about the brain, emotional regulation skills, to expressive arts stuff, to expressive arts fun and that kind of thing. There are so many. I know right now, there's just a lot that's not present that has been present in the past and will be present, you know, in the future when this is all over and when we're through it. So
yeah, we have had to separate our kitchen and our living because the volunteers are mainly in the kitchen and the residents are mainly in the living areas now. But before, cooking was an activity that residents and volunteers really enjoyed together, and a lot of the residents gained skills. Most of them don't have kitchens and don't have cooking experience, and so they were able to pull gardens out of the vegetable and go into the kitchen and learn how to prepare them, and that was beautiful to see. It'll be back soon.
One thing, we've got about 10 minutes, and I do want y'all to touch on before we go what you do for yourselves to promote your own health and wellness.
I love that question. That was my favorite one of all of them. I was like, oh, because that's the really important piece, I think. So I think starting with the shelter in general, like for me, the teamwork, being able, like I'm very close to the coordinators and the people that I work with, and I really care a lot about them. And I think the connection that we have, and there are a lot of us, you know, there are a lot of us, but the connection that we have with each other is incredibly important when we're looking at the work that we're doing, because it's tough work. And so no one person can do it on their own. So I think that's one incredibly important. Other ones that are very work related for me is I'm a big fan in practicing the things that I teach. Like every single thing that I talk to people about, I have done it or I'm doing it or constantly, you know, and so it is, whether it's the breathing strategies, the mindfulness work, or it's, you know, talking about gratitude and talking about compassion. I mean, we have these conversations, recognizing with the, you know, how the brain impacts how the brain works with us, you know, and how we can work with the brain. For me, looking at things through a compassionate lens is a resiliency strategy. It is important. It shifts things immediately. So if someone is really struggling and saying very harmful things or hurtful things at that time, if I can back up and go, okay, whoa, this is coming from a place of their past experiences. This is not, you know, this is a reaction. This is something that they learned that once served them well. And being able to shift that within myself, it settles everything down for me. So even in those hard situations, just always looking at things through a compassionate lens. And then at work too, it's searching for the good, the strengths, the optimism, the hope, celebrating the successes, because there are a ton of them. And then it's honoring my feelings, it's owning them. For me, getting support when I need it. I have different people that I consult with, you know, from a therapeutic standpoint, but I also have like a group of EMDR therapists that I'll get together with, and just like, we'll just problem solve things, but that's a huge support, and it's only once a month, but it helps, you know. It's knowing when I have to do my own work, and when whatever I've heard or am in the midst of working with someone through is too much, you know, that knowing like, okay, I need to be able to do my own work around this too. And then the other things that are just like, that are really important in terms of resilience is like, I run and I work out every morning because I have to, and my brain does not do well if I don't. And you can ask my family that. I mean, it is like Sunday, it didn't happen until 1 because of extenuating circumstances, and I was about to jump out of my skin. And both my child and my husband will be like, have you gone for a run yet? Because can you go? You know, yeah. And it's like just knowing like that I've got to have that, getting outside, being in nature, spending time with my family, you know, it's all of these like wonderful things, like learning, growing, doing crazy things with them and insane adventures. And just because why not, you know, but just having that space where like, we can just laugh and have fun too. And there is still a lot of good in this world. There's a lot of good in this world in spite of all of these really hard things going on right now.
Something I do is I'll just show them off. I like to work with animals. I got 2 kitties. I'm currently fostering 5 kittens. It's kitten season. And these kittens were abandoned by their mother in the hospital. They were given to the Watauga Humane Society. And I have a little bit of training with prenatal kittens. So something that really helps me is I come home and I lay on the ground and 5 kittens crawl all over me. Walking my dog is a big thing. And really the supportive work environment makes the difference in the world, because people are patient, because there's days where you need to break down and cry. And all of the staff there understand and have been there. Definitely practicing meditation and breathing techniques. Eating, it's basic, but it's necessary. Eating healthy, making sure that your necessary needs are met before you try to meet anybody else's. And Jenna, we had a question about quotes that you use to help inspire you. And Jenna is really big on and Andres.
Yeah. Do you guys know Brian Andreas? I love him. Google his stuff and hit images. Brian Andreas, but he's got I don't know, he's touching and he's humorous and he's funny, and you'll laugh and cry sometimes at the same pictures.
I've got one pulled up here. Most people don't know that there are angels whose only job is to make sure you don't get too comfortable and fall asleep and miss your life.
Yeah, that was the one from Monday, right? Sometimes
Yes.
I just send them out, but I love him.
He's a story people guy. People may know him as story people.
He's a story people guy. Yeah, he's great. He's great. I love Ralph Waldo Emerson's, because I'm on the spot, I'm going to lose it. But his poem about just like making a difference, even if it's a healthy child or a garden patch, it's that one, and then different things come up at different times. But
Candace posted a link to the stories if you want to look at those. Yeah.
Story people. And we got about 3 minutes. I was going to see, we could stay several more hours if we could, because this is enthralling to me. But if anybody has a question or a comment that they want to make in these last couple minutes, you're welcome to either unmute yourself or type it in the chat, and we'll read it to Lily and Jenna as we start wrapping up to go. So Jenna, is there anything that we didn't think to ask you, or that you wanted to make sure, or Lily, either one, make sure you covered before we all have to leave each other?
That'll come to me as soon as we hang up. It will.
Yep.
I'll be like, oh, I wish because I'm walking upstairs and I'm like, there are like 23 things I wanted to make sure that I touched upon. And I think we've done a good job overall, but I'm sure there'll be something that,
Yeah. If anybody's looking, I know we have a lot of nonprofits in the area. I'm trying to specialize in data nonprofits, and we're trying to help other nonprofits in the area expand their data analyses and tracking capabilities. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Denise has all my information. My email is very simple. It's lily@house.org.
This is an interesting question. You have 60 seconds. In an ideal world, if you had a magic wand, what would your ideal hospitality house setup look like?
My daughter just did this. She created the whole ideal hospitality house. Oh, she did, Lily. It was fantastic. She had everyone had their own room, gardens, swimming pools, trampolines. I mean, it was fantastic. So go ahead. You were about to start, but
enough services to feed our population is really the thing that comes to mind, is because right now we're one shelter for 7 counties, and there are people in those other 6 counties that we can't reach. We don't know how. We're trying, we're advertising, we're putting our name out there, we're talking about our services, but it's really hard to reach the entire population we want to.
And I think just the coming together, the community, helping embrace and hold up and carry and love each other and learn from each other. I mean, that would be ideal, right? That's so, I mean, it's big theory stuff, but it's that sense of being able to connect, and that we're all in this together. This is not an us and them. We are all in this together. This is our community, so.
Awesome way to leave, with some hope and compassion, and that we're all in this together. So thank you again, Jenna and Lily, for being with us today. It was great to spend time with you. I hope y'all have a good rest of the day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you everyone.
So
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Lots of thank yous in the chat, if you could see those.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so many. Oh, hey,
right.
Mary.
Y'all have a good day.
You too.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.